like magic. And we're live just like that. So welcome back. Sound Advice is back with you again. This is Wednesday, the 21st of April. Last night, there was a huge announcement from Apple about podcasting, so I thought I would jump on and share some of our thoughts on it with you. I am excited to be joined today by my friend Amanda, who is looks after the slate of podcasts at Westbrook Inc. in LA, in the US. She looks after the shows that are in the Red Table Talks brand. So Jada Pinkett Smith's podcast and content arm. Is that right?
That's correct.
Arm. That's not the right word. Well, you've probably seen Red Table Talks on Facebook, and if you haven't, you should go check it out. They're making a whole slate of podcasts around it. Amanda looks after that, sits within Westbrook. That's basically the essence of it, isn't it?
Yeah, covers
Is that
it.
about right?
Yeah.
Knows more about podcasting than pretty much anyone I've ever met. Has been working in podcasting now for how long?
Forever.
Quite a while.
Since it was
Forever.
radio.
Forever. Since it was radio. So no one better positioned to share their thoughts on the latest announcements from Apple, which were, and let's just kick off with a quick overview on what was announced.
So they've basically said that they're going to bring in a subscription level on Apple Podcasts. So previously, it's obviously been completely free, and Apple Podcasts also didn't host your content there at all. They just pulled the RSS feed, and then it was this most incredible distribution platform because it's still got about 75% of listenership of all podcasts, depending on which stat you take, but between 65 and 75. And
hotly debated topic that though.
Hotly it is, and understandably so, and because they don't release their exact figures, and other platforms have different calculations and the fun land of podcast numbers, but ultimately it is where most listening still takes place, and it was completely open, and now they've introduced a subscription level, which is for creators of podcasts to put their content up there for listeners to subscribe to in a channel format. And with that, they're also giving hosting. So that means you can get all your data and analytics and back-end dashboard through running your Apple Podcast subscription creator channel.
So what that means is in the latest Apple announcement, what they've said is that podcasts will be free, and they've updated the app as well, I think, haven't they? There are updates to the app coming.
It's coming in May.
Okay.
So yeah, they've given a month's notice, basically.
So the clunky, illogical, doesn't make a lot of sense Apple Podcasts app that we've lived with for years is getting a refresh, apparently. It's going to be way better, but we'll wait and see. Because it is one of my life fascinations that it doesn't make any sense currently. It's so weird. In fact, I think I sent you that amazing video the other day of that kid, and I don't know if you'd seen it before, but I don't know if you watched it, but it makes so much sense because it is so stupid. But on top of that, what they've said is that you'll now be able to charge a fee to your listening audience for some of your episodes. So you can still host your podcast with your podcast host, Libsyn, Buzzsprout, whoever that might be, but you can also now host some episodes at Apple if you want and charge for the pleasure of listening to those episodes or a series or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I think this is going to particularly impact Patreon and people who currently use Patreon as a paywall or a subscription service. I think that's going to make a difference to that sector of podcasting, because this kind of steps into that territory a lot.
But it does. So, I mean, if we talk about, first off, what this whole announcement means for podcast creators, which is most of my audience, and I think the thing that lots of people will be interested in. So for some people who are using Patreon to build a community or charge for some of their content or charge for additional content, this is definitely competition to that. I think one of the big differences is Patreon charges, and I think it's 12%, but might have to fact check that. And the cost at Apple is going to be 30% of the revenue for the first year that you're with them, and then moving to 15% for the second year. So you're getting 70 cents on the dollar, basically, that you're charging for content. Do we know yet? Is it will it be monthly subscription, or it's a...
I imagine it'll be a monthly subscription, and that runs concurrent with every other kind of subscription deal that Apple does, and also that 70-30 split will be very familiar to people in podcasting in general, because you also tend to get that when you work with advertising hosts, and on that side of the business, ad sponsored content as well. So the 70-30 split is pretty familiar to most.
So I think for both of us, the details of how, of the deal and how it works, that's not really our bag. We both approach podcasting from a, creative perspective and more into the storytelling and the detail. I guess that's the conversations that we normally have offline. So, I think we're probably better positioned to talk about this in terms of the impact for creators on making stuff rather than the details of the deal. And I think the first thing for me that stands out, which is a narrative that I have been trying to push for a long time, is the future of successful, wash its own face, commercially viable podcasting is by creating a way of monetizing your audience. So currently I see it that the way it has existed to date is that there are two groups of podcasters. There's the 90. This is put, really, generalizing, but it's an easy way to understand, I suppose. 99% of the market, they're the hobbyists, the people who've never posted, the people getting a little bit of success, but probably not making enough to live on their podcast. Those guys make up a big part of the community, but they only probably generate 1% of the revenue. When then you've got 1% of the elite podcasters at the top, the people that everyone can name, taking 99% of the revenue. And that revenue is coming from advertisers and partners, which is often sold through an exchange to make it easier for you to get to that ad revenue. I think that the future of podcasting and the way to cross that chasm from it being a hobby type podcast through to it being more of a business or a brand or commercially viable effort is to monetize your audience. You've seen that happen on YouTube. You've seen that happen with Substack, with other types of content being created. And I think that you'll now start to see this with podcasting. There'll be a trust that it is okay to ask your audience to support what you're doing. And that will create this whole new genre, this whole new group of podcasts in the middle. So hopefully we'll have three, you'll end up with three tiers. You'll end up with the hobbyists, you'll end up with those monetizing their audience, and then you'll have the elite few doing huge brand deals at the top. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think, the brand deals are going to be interesting now, because it's all about audience reach, and the right kind of audience. And as we know with podcasting, there's niche audiences in a lot of areas that may not be huge, but are very, very focused and very engaged with the content. And I think, again, the subscription layer breaks that up to a certain extent, because the question is going to be, how do you build an audience from behind a subscription wall? If you want to go that route, as opposed to, do you want to put it out there? Maybe you get your brand sponsorship, maybe you build and build and build your audience. And then at a certain point, when you have your audience built, do you do better then by moving it behind the subscription wall? And I think, that's a very positive opportunity for creators in many aspects, because
I think it's really exciting, but I think it's about a whole shift away from getting bogged down in the detail of production. Production of a podcast, you need to get yourself to the point that it's the equivalent of eating every day. Like, I don't put all of my thoughts into I wish I could, but I don't put all my thoughts into what I'm going to eat every day. It's just something I do whilst I'm doing other things to build and develop my life and become a more enriched human. And I think that's the same with podcasting. You've got to get to a point where you're not getting bogged down in who your next guest is, or, what is going on, and what you are to make the content, and what you are thinking about is, how can I do more with this? How can I take this from being a podcast to being an audio first experience that maybe moves into other mediums? And one of those can now really easily, through this announcement from Apple, be a subscription or a paid version of your podcast that might then sit alongside your live event, your merchandise line, your social content, whatever else it is you're doing to build experience. But this is a really simple one that's along the same lines. That would be a really good step. Have you got any advice? Not have you. What is your advice to creators when they start thinking about what can I make paid and what should be free? Because I think that's a thing that people are going to come up against, is like, okay, but this is my podcast, and I know, people are so rigid with what they can do. Like I was actually just looking at some footage I recorded before about podcast episode titles and how change them all the time. And it's exactly the same with this. Like, we talk to creators all the time about having the self-belief or the, just owning their show. Like, if you want to change it, change it. And I think that's going to be a big hurdle. What's your advice to people when they're thinking about that?
First of all, your philosophy on where a podcast should go and what we should be imagining for our podcast is interesting, and very entrepreneurial.
In what way? What do you mean?
Well, just the idea that you're building your podcast in order to conquer the universe, and grow out into other IP. You're not wrong.
Well, there's only $1 billion in advertising in the podcasting industry, right? So if you have ambition of any scale. Only $1 billion, but if you have ambition of any scale...
Well, actually, now it's 1.4.
That makes all the fucking difference. But you guys, I learned this from you. That's ironic that you say that, because I learned this from you. Because one of the great things that the guys at Westbrook do is they look at every show through the lens of, what else can we do with this? How can we make this as one part of a bigger brand experience?
Yeah, but...
Mine's just like the version for independent creators.
This is a horrible line that I hate when everyone trots it out to me, and I'm now going to do it to you. So apologies in advance, but don't run before you can walk. So, too many people are coming to podcast and thinking immediately about visuals, about social, about merchandise, and there's absolutely no point in thinking about any of those things if you create rubbish audio content, and you're not going to build your audience in audio if you create not very compelling audio content. And you and I agree on this 100%.
We do.
I know we agree on this.
We do, but I'm also just going to flag in the other direction as someone, of the two of us, I'm less romantic about the importance of the audio quality content, whatever. I hear you totally. But I also think there's an important message to go to people either thinking about making a podcast or making one, that it goes both ways. Make sure you make good audio quality, but also it can be as great as you want. But if you've got no one listening, then what's the point? And the way to get people listening is to allow them to be a fan of your show, allow them to interact, find them where they already exist.
Yes.
So it is a two-way street.
It is a two-way street, but you can call me a romantic about it, but I think it's cold, hard business sense, because
it is.
And Mr. Vaynerchuk would agree with me on this, that you should put your 200% focus and passion into what you do and into the process of what you do, in order not just to make what you're making worthwhile. And it's a very creative endeavor to make a podcast, but you're also communicating to other people, and you're educating and helping other people. And that's a responsibility. So you really want to get it right. You want to do it well. And you want to put that real focus and effort in there. And when you do that, the other things do then start to come along. You'll know when you get to a point with your podcast where you should be merchandising, or where you might have IP to turn it into a TV show, or where you maybe should think about, turning this into a network of podcasts. You'll know because you've already built a really great podcast that people are responding to, that people are listening to, that sponsors are starting to knock on your door and say, oh, we heard about, you're doing this in our niche and we'd love to, support you in this. You'll know then. But when you first kick off on it, you should be completely concentrating on creating a really high quality product, just like any other business.
And I agree with that. However, I'd like to caveat that with the idea that you already know what makes a great podcast. And so you already consider those things. And one of the ways that we try to help creators to think about what is a great way, what a great podcast would look like, is to consider those other things first. So you've got to think about your big picture first and what's the long-term vision, then narrow that down to making a great show, and then it can come back out again. Mm-hmm. So I think when you think about, for a creator, the opportunity to put something behind a paywall or to, charge a subscription model, it's probably not to throw your entire podcast there. It's probably to come up with maybe a new concept or a limited series or, a special that you're going to make or something along those lines, rather than.
For certain, it's got to fit the medium, and a subscription medium is different to an ad model. And you're exactly right that your content, you should think about what kind of content you produce for that model. For example, dramas are an awful lot better, with less ad interruption, right? And they also, a different form of and type of production. Scripted content is a whole other thing, and this subscription platform might be a really, really fantastic place to build and grow scripted drama audio in an open entrepreneurial manner that you can then build IP that does go to the big studios and to development into film or television. So that's an area where it could be really enhancing.
I think it's really just opening up the opportunities for creators to do so many more exciting things, and it's a real validation that that's a good idea, and monetizing your community is a good idea, not just relying on advertisers. But I know we've got to go in only a few minutes. I just want to get your take on the impact of the Apple announcement on advertisers and advertising and partners and sponsors, because I think that's a key part of podcasting historically. It's the thing that everyone thinks is the magic ticket. Well, I'll just get a sponsor to pay for it. How do you see that working? I mean, just to do some very quick maths here, we don't recommend any sponsorship deal under £3,000 for any kind of creator, because your own worth can't really ever be less than that. And that's for an episode. I mean, not for a series, per episode. And the equivalent through the Apple model, if you take in the 30% fee, means you're going to need to get about 3,500 listens to your episode paid for on a subscription model to cover your costs. You need about 3,500 listeners. So, I think advertising is still going to play a big part in this whole picture, but it's going to have an impact on value and how it fits in. What's your initial? It's only been 12 hours, but what's your initial take on that?
Yeah, I've managed to sleep on it, which probably helped a bit. But I think that, what we were just saying is again true, that you need to fit your content around your model. And there is some content that, that will lean towards advertising orientated, sponsorship orientated content better, interview shows, that kind of content. But I also think that, it's going to be really interesting to see how many subscribers, from listeners you're going to get, because, we've seen Luminary's efforts, and we've seen, how tough it's been for them. Obviously, they dropped their subscription from $9.99 to $2.99 a year and a half ago. At this point, they announced.
I've never even paid $2.99.
Right, and we're in the industry, right? So, and they announced last night, when Apple made their announcement, that they're moving their slate to Apple subscriptions whole. So you've got to, you've also got to ask the question, how much appetite of podcasting audience is there for subscription? Just like with the magazine industry, because we know about Netflix, we know about video on demand. And we also know about the mistakes that people make consistently by looking at it and trying to apply it directly to podcasting. Because although there are similarities in terms of audience desire for on-demand content, the way that audience consume and the value that they put on that content is completely different between audio and video. So, the question of whether the audience will sustain a full subscription model is definitely there, and I think it will take time to grow. I also think that eventually it will move towards what Apple have done with magazine and newspaper consumption, which is a bundled subscription, which gives the user more value and more options in the content that they're paying for. You look at Spotify, and Spotify have said, we're continuing with our podcasts to have ads in them, even though our subscribers who pay $9.99 a month for a Spotify subscription are still getting those ads in their podcasts. So it's going to be interesting also to see how this impacts Spotify.
I mean, I would imagine that Spotify will announce something very similar very soon. I've sort of heard on the informal grapevine that might be a thing, and we haven't got time to talk about it now. But there were also huge announcements from Reddit and Facebook yesterday about podcasting. Facebook getting more in the podcasting game, which is really interesting when you think about building communities and then looping back round to the subscriber model. Reddit also, which is huge US communities of people in these subcultures, which is podcasting is a subculture made up of subcultures, and Reddit is basically the same thing. And so when they tie together, that could be super powerful. I think we've got 1 minute. I think that one of the things that would be really interesting for advertisers to see is, this is just a personal vendetta of mine against the major publishers, but I can't wait to see again the rise of the influencer, of this new generation of creator. And I think that this subscription model only will increase that. So if you're, if you currently have a YouTube audience, or you have a really loyal audience somewhere else, it's going to get more expensive for advertisers now, because I'm going to have the leverage to just instantly, like that, in a credible place without any weird, go to my Patreon's great, but not many people know about in the scheme of things, they don't trust it. Apple, yeah, everyone's got it. So you can take someone with 500,000 followers on YouTube, say, okay, make the content, it costs X, put it here, take 10%, and we'll know very soon what the conversion to that kind of thing is from your, if you've got 500,000 YouTube followers, what percentage of those will translate into paying subscribers? What's your production cost? You've got a whole easy business model in there, if you get what I mean. And that will make it harder for advertisers to be attractive to the brands, because to the creators, because they'll just monetize their audiences directly without having to flog something.
That's true. And on the other, going the other way, if you create a really, really incredibly beautiful season or series of podcast content under subscription, and you get a really dedicated audience again of a certain niche or a certain type, I can see advertisers and sponsors cherry picking those and bringing it back out from your subscription wall with a sponsor. And
there are lessons to be learned from getting it right, like the whole Joe Rogan, Spotify coming off YouTube move. Do a bit of analysis to how that's played out. Whether that be good or bad, I'm not here to say that, but working out what works best for you and testing different stuff. You can learn. If he had the balls to do it with his 190 million downloads a month, regardless of the money, he's willing to try different stuff to find out what works. And Spotify are willing to do the same commercially. That's a really good attitude to take for all people thinking about this kind of thing, because it's going to take a while to figure out user habits.
Yeah, essentially, it does give the creator a little bit more control. But ultimately, the creator still needs to create compelling content.
And advertisers, I reckon it's going to get more expensive, if I'm honest. I can't, don't you? I can't say it's get cheaper.
It always was anyway, because more and more people are listening to podcasts. So you've got a growing audience, and advertisers wish to reach audience. So, that's the case.
Advertising is going to have to go down is going to have to come down to an alignment thing, not just a, advertising return. And it would be less of a numbers game and more of a a conversation around, a partnership and a bigger relationship than just audio ads. So if you're a brand spending money with an audio exchange, you don't need me to name who they are. Have a think about how you could be doing a better job of working more closely with that creator, with that podcaster, because their socials, the other stuff that they're doing, what they're wearing, what their videos look like, there's opportunity for you in all of those places. And that ad exchange is sitting between you and that relationship, and that is costing you. You're being lazy and it's costing you a fortune, and they're becoming rapidly more irrelevant. So start doing that work before the cost goes up, and you can get some of that underpriced attention back. Amanda, thanks for joining me. We got to go. We should do this again.
Yeah.
Next time we'll talk about the thing we were going to talk about when we planned this.
Yeah, and the Reddit thing and the Facebook thing. I want to talk about that too.
Okay. Lovely to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
that was
for
fun.
watching, guys.